In the sequel to last year's most anticipated Twilight, we now have Robert Pattinson as Edward Cullen, Bella Swan as Kristen Stewart, and Taylor Lautner as the strip-off boy, Jacob Black. Now, I saw the first Twilight film over about a year ago, and I am actually one of the people who liked the first movie. I thought that the first film had an interesting premise, it was a different take on vampires, and the story was alright, it was pretty well thought out. And the pacing of it didn't affect my enjoyment too much, you know, because it didn't drag too much, so I was actually interested enough in what was going on. And, you know, at the end it was a pretty good conclusion. So I myself was also looking forward to the Twilight Saga New Moon. So, what did I think of New Moon as opposed to Twilight? Well, you'll find out in this review. So here we go. The plot of Twilight New Moon. Now, after the events at the end of the first film, Twilight, we now have Bella Swan, who turns 18, and the Cullens want to throw a party for her. And what happens is that, you know, everything goes well, and then, paper cut. And then, of course, Jasper decides to lose it, tries to kill her, and then this sets up the story where Edward, for some stupid reason, has to break up with Bella and decides to move away, which, of course, Bella becomes depressed. Jacob Black sort of steps in for Edward and tries to comfort her. And then later on in the movie, she finds out Edward trying to commit suicide, so it becomes a rescue mission to save Edward, while also unravelling her feelings for Jacob. So that's the basic premise of the Twilight Saga New Moon. Now, based on the trailer for this movie, I thought it looked like a really badass action flick. It looked like a much, much better premise than the first one. It looked like it would improve on the style of the first one. And I was hoping, and when I was going to this movie, I was thinking, God, I hope this doesn't suck. Please do not suck. Came out, not impressed. I mean it, I was not impressed with this film. Let's get into the pros and cons of the film. Pros about the film. The pros about the film is that the Twilight Saga New Moon, it did actually set up the story well for the Twilight Saga Eclipse, which comes out later this year. But Twilight Saga New Moon, it did have a pretty interesting premise, it did set it up pretty well. So I give them credit for that. The end sequence, while it was a little bit pants, it still did set up the story, it had a fitting cliffhanger-like ending for the end of the second film to start the third. What else was good? Some of the relationship issues on screen I did think were partially believable. So it wasn't like a total waste of screen time for the sake of it. It did actually have relevance to what was going on, you know. So, I'm going to applaud the characters of Bella and, I was about to say Edward there, Jacob for that. So, because I really do think that the characters, they did evolve it and they made it semi-believable. What else? Setups were done pretty well, particularly with regard to the main villains. Unfortunately, the payoff was shit, but, you know, but really apart from that, you know, other than it being a pretty good story, well, it was a much more interesting story, I thought, than the first movie, but I think the story could have been done well, but I think that just the execution of this movie was done so pathetically poorly that it was almost unintentionally funny. Right, so, apart from that sense, let's get into the bad stuff, right? First of all, this movie has some pretty shit acting. Bella Swan, right, Kristen Stewart, she wasn't that great in the first film, and I was expecting her to be she's a little bit better here, but still there's definitely room for improvement. So in terms of acting, Kristen Stewart's step up from the first film. Robert Pattinson's a big step down. I liked him better in the first movie. The first movie, he actually felt like it was believable. In this one, he was so depressed every time he was on screen, and whenever he went off screen, I could never be glad to get rid of a character so much. Right. And many girls will be going to see this movie for this reason. Taylor Lautner as Jacob Black. Or I should say, the Twilight Saga strip fest for Jacob. Where to begin with this? Right. Taylor Lautner, I think, was a pretty good actor in the first movie, but I liked his character better as a side character. I didn't like how they introduced him as a main character in this one. You know, it's just an unnecessary love complication that just didn't need to be there. It felt the relationships, while it did partially work, at the same time, it did feel a bit forced. And Taylor Lautner's acting was just so one-dimensional, you couldn't even tell if he was actually meaning what he was saying in his performance or just saying it for the hell of it. But, look, I think that the guy has talent. He will, no doubt, have a good acting career ahead of him. He just needs to do a bit less of this and a bit more acting. Which is another thing that I actually found surprisingly dull about this movie. First of all, before I get into how dull I thought it was, there is way too much stripping in this film. I actually was by the time towards the end, I was like this. Oh man, another ab scene. Right, we get it. You've got abs. I know that girls, girls don't get boys' abs that much. We could see Megan Fox stripping in Transformers, but admittedly, Michael Bay did not focus on that enough, like Chris Weitz did in New Moon. Chris Weitz. We've already established that they've got abs. You don't need. We established that within the first half hour of the film. You don't need to keep showing us it till the very end. That is not what I paid £4.30 out of my own cash to see. I was hoping to see a pretty good story, despite some people were disbelieving that. But look, right. Another thing I didn't like about this movie, way too long. It was way too long. The middles, the whole the execution of the story, for example, was just done incredibly shit. It was done poor. The execution was so laughably bad that they tried to start off the story at the start, which was an okay way to start the movie off. Not the best opening I've seen, but it's still a pretty good opening. Then it loses complete sight of the story and it starts to become a romantic drama for Bella and Jacob. Then it attempts to try and tell another story towards the end of the movie, but at that point I'd nearly lost interest in what was going on. And one thing I really didn't like about this film was how pathetically handled the Volturi were. Based on the trailer, they look like a much better villain than James did from the first movie. But they were even worse. They didn't come in until the last half hour of the film, by which point they had no relevance to the main plot. If you could cut out the first hour and a half of it, they would have the same effect. The Volturi, in fact, would be more interesting if you cut out most of the film. Oh dear. One thing I actually didn't like about the first film was how the action sequences looked like it was pathetically choreographed by a kid. And the action sequences in this one were definitely not an improvement. It was just like punch, 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 the end. That's all the action there was. Such a disappointment. Look, but overall, to wrap this movie review up, guys, look, a lot of female people I know are in love with Twilight. They love the Twilight series. I'll admit, I actually did have a soft spot for the first film. I just didn't like the second one that much. That's not to say I disliked it, I just didn't like it. But look, it does set up the story pretty well for Eclipse, and some of the relationships do tend to work. I think that the ending sequence I thought was pretty well done, that sort of thing. But unfortunately, due to the poor execution of the story, due to the pretty almost crap acting, yes, even from Robert Pattinson was crap, and due to the basically near poor special effects in this film, from the CGI wolves, which look absolutely bad, there's no way I can say this movie's good, because it isn't. Is it terrible? No. Thank God it is not terrible. But it's nothing memorable, it's nothing special, it's nothing even good. It's just something that you could think, it was okay, but I wouldn't recommend it. So I'm going to give 2.5 stars to Twilight Saga and New Moon. The first film I give 3.5 stars, simply because the execution in that story was done a bit better. So until next time, YouTube, unless you get bitten by Edward Cullen, girls would love that. Michael Bowers, signing out.